The Richest Man in Town by V.J. Smith. Day Two's reading, pages 24 through 37. Chapter 3. Coffee, Tears, and Fried Cornmeal Mush. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into," Marty said as I greeted him in the restaurant of a local grocery store. That's the place he picked for our first meeting. Marty had been sitting in a booth drinking coffee when I arrived. I brought a notebook and a pencil with me. This man had a story to tell, and I felt a need to record it. I had already been referring to Marty's customer service qualities in my speeches, but other than the few moments I had seen him at Walmart, I didn't know anything about him. Why was he so different than any other cashier I had ever met? I had no intention of writing a talk about his life, much less a book. I just wanted to know why he was so happy, and what I could learn from him. After buying a cup of coffee, I sat down with him. Idle conversation filled those next few minutes until I asked, "Are you married?" Marty's eyes lit up. "I got married to the most beautiful girl in the world, and she still is. Her name is Mickey, and you need to meet her." I told him I would like to do that. "Kids?" I asked. "4," he said. "3 boys and a girl." I opened my notebook and asked Marty if it was okay to write down his answers to my questions. Marty looked at the notebook and grinned. "You want to write stuff about me?" It was obvious he hadn't been interviewed before. I thought I'd start with some easy questions. "When were you born?" "August 12th, 1926. I'll be 74 years old this August. It's hard to believe. So you had to go through the Great Depression. What was that like?" I asked. He paused for a moment, looked at his hands circling the coffee cup, and let his mind take a trip back in time. "We just lived from day to day. My family was very hard up at that time, and I just figured everyone else was in the same boat. Most of them were. Marty's mother stayed at home to take care of him and his brother and 2 sisters. His father was a common laborer, moving from one job to the next, often taking the family from town to town. In one place he worked on a turkey farm. In another he tended bar. Maybe it was the times mixed with his lack of any particular skill. Growing up in the 30s and 40s, people cared about people," Marty said. "We helped each other out without giving it a second thought. I suppose that's carried over to today." As a young boy, Marty watched his father pour drinks at a bar. "I remember a lot of men who worked hard in the stone quarry, and when they got their paychecks, they would go to the beer parlor. They would squander their money while their family was at home with very little to eat. I guess that is one of the reasons why I never drank." After taking a sip of coffee, Marty continued. "We were dirt poor. Most days I ate a piece of bread smeared with lard and sprinkled with some salt and pepper on it. I don't ever remember eating red meat during the entire 30s. I never got to go to a restaurant until I was 10 years old." He started to laugh. "Have you ever had fried cornmeal mush?" I told him I'd never heard of it. "I'll fix it for you sometime. I still eat it because I kind of like it," he said, still laughing. I was smiling too, as he remembered those years. "I'll tell you how bad it got," Marty told me. "When I was 8 years old, I had a pet chicken. She would follow me around like it was a dog. Usually you can't pick up a chicken and hold it, but that one you could. Things got so bad we were forced to eat the poor thing. I cried, but I had to eat. That's the way it was." My smile quickly faded. Now I felt bad for smiling. These could be sad memories for Marty, yet he continued to share them with me. "When I was a kid, I went to the dump ground and found the inner tube of an old tire. I made myself a slingshot. I got good with that slingshot, and once in a while I got a rabbit." Marty was silent for a time, then tears ran from his eyes. In a quiet voice he said, "You know, one of the greatest memories I have of my mother was the day I walked through the front door, holding 2 rabbits. My mother sat at the kitchen table and cried. She couldn't believe we had 2 rabbits to eat." His voice trailed off. He said nothing for a few minutes and just drank coffee and wiped away tears. Finally, Marty said, "My problem is that I'm a softie. I got that from my mother. Can we talk about something else?" At that moment I scrambled for something to ask. The first 6 questions I had written on my list dealt with family matters. It was obvious I needed to change directions. "Why do you shake hands with customers?" I asked. The question revived him. "It happened by It happened by accident," Marty replied. "A couple of years ago, when I was first hired as a greeter at the store, 4 college students walked in. I shook their hands. One guy walked a few steps, turned around and said, 'I like that.' So I've been doing it ever since. I shake hands with 220 people a day. Some people want a hug. There was one lady who wanted a kiss." He laughed. "Most people seem to like it. I know some don't. Germs, you know. There was one guy who wouldn't shake my hand because, he said, I'm a Quaker, not a shaker." I'm still trying to figure that one out. I had given a lot of thought to the techniques technique behind that handshake. You have to look people dead in the eye when you shake their hand. That's the only way to go. I'm trying to show them that I appreciate them," he said. The shaking of hands surprised the newcomers to the store. Most of the locals expected it and liked it, but for the uninitiated, it was a whole new experience. "Oh, let me tell you a story," Marty said. "A year ago, a woman came through my line, and I stuck out my hand. She jumped back. She acted like I had a gun or something. I said to her, 'Hasn't anyone ever shook your hand before?' The lady said, 'I'm from South Carolina. There's a store in South Carolina where they shake hands all the time.' I yelled, 'Hooray for South Carolina!' and she walked out the door. 5 minutes later, she was back in my line, buying nothing. I said, 'Can I help you?' She touched my arm and said, 'I lied to you.' I got out in the parking lot and started thinking about it. There's no store in South Carolina where they shake hands. You're the first one. I needed to come back in here and apologize for lying. Will you accept my apology?" Marty whacked his hand on the table and laughed. "Do you believe that?" he asked. I grinned and thought to myself, Marty got that woman to find religion in the parking lot of Walmart. At that point, a restaurant worker came by with a mop and a pail filled with water. It was a signal our conversation needed to come to an end. I told Marty I would like to talk to him again. "That would be great," he replied. "Why don't you come to my house next Tuesday night? You can meet Mickey." "Where do you live?" "Number 57, Normandy Village," he said. I had to think for a moment before I remembered that Normandy Village was a trailer park. I had driven by there many times. "Oh," I said, "you live in a trailer?" Marty looked at me with a quiet sense of pride and said, "I own a double wide." We shook hands and said goodbye. I left the store with more questions than I had when I walked in. The main one was simple. Why was he so happy? I had known a lot of people who owned big cars, earned big paychecks, lived in big houses, and had seemingly perfect family lives, yet they were miserable. This guy was working into his 70s, came through some tough times, and didn't seem to have a lot of material things. He was the happy one. I was hoping to find my answers in a trailer park. You have to look people dead in the eye when you shake their hand. Chapter 4. Nights at the Round Table. Narrow roads wound through the Normandy Village trailer park. Following Marty's directions, I made 2 quick lefts and suddenly found myself staring at a double-wide home. That must be it, I thought. Marty greeted me at the door with a brisk handshake. "Welcome! This is Mickey," he said. Mickey had kind eyes and a warm smile. She appeared to be a little shy, even when I extended my hand. After a few moments, Marty said, "Let's go into the kitchen and sit at the table." That round wooden table became our visiting place on countless nights. I would sit directly across from Marty. Mickey would be only an arm's length from her husband. The coffee pot was always on. Several times during the course of an evening, Marty or Mickey would ask, "Can I get you another cup of coffee?" Then they would politely argue about who would get the cup. "I'll get it, honey, just sit down." Or, "No, babe, I've got it." This happened time after time. I don't like to drink coffee at night. Not wanting to offend them, I drank it anyway, and drank some more. Sometimes 8 cups of coffee at a sitting. I found out later that Marty purposely kept my cup full, thinking I would leave if it were empty. It was his way of saying, "Please stay." I brought along my notebook for my early visits to the Martinson home. On that first night, I opened it, and Marty looked at Mickey. He nodded toward the notebook and said, "See, he writes stuff down." Marty left school in the 9th grade to earn money for the family. For the next 3 years, he worked in a traveling carnival. The job required him to operate all the rides and run penny pitchment games in the dart booth. Marty said, "The people I worked with weren't regular carnies. They were clean people." Life with the carnival ended with a draft letter from Uncle Sam in August 1944. Marty was 18 years old when the United States was fighting wars on 2 fronts. As a private in the United States Army, he sailed to the Philippines to fight the Japanese. "I got shot at," Marty said, "and I shot back." He sent most of his pay home to his parents, so his parents could buy a house. Marty was part of what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. I thought he might like to tell me about some of his experiences. I asked him, "Do you have special memories of the war?" The question turned him silent. Tears filled his eyes, and in a soft voice he said, "I saw so many of my friends blown up in front of my face. I can't talk about it." So he didn't. He could talk about the end of the war. He was on a troop transport ship anchored a few miles off the Japanese coast awaiting orders. Our commander told us that a lot of us were going to die when we invaded Japan. "I was scared to death," he said. Then atomic bombs destroyed the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forcing surrender. Marty said, "When I heard about the bombs, I was happy." Now I feel sad about those poor Japanese people who died. But I got to go home. Other wartime memories were just too painful. His grandson asked him to come to school to talk about World War II. On the night he told me about his grandson's invitation, he said, I can't! Then he threw back his head and let out a high-pitched cry. Mickey jumped from her chair and put an arm around Marty. It's okay, honey, it's okay, she told him. You don't have to talk about it. Mickey had grown up under difficult circumstances, too. When she was 9 years old, her parents were forced to give up their children because they couldn't care for them. 9 brothers and sisters were shipped off to orphanages. Marty's quiet way attracted her when they first met. It also nearly kept them apart. Mickey found the other men she had dated a little too brassy for her. She met Marty through her sister. He was quiet, shy, and handsome, she told me, but Marty was too shy to ask her out, and she insisted that he personally ask her out for a date. He had approached her sister to see if Mickey might be interested in him. He did ask her out, still uncertain whether she wanted to date him. Mickey asked her sister what she thought about Marty. He would be a good catch, she said. Besides, he's good to his mother. That was enough. They courted for 2 years before they were married by a justice of the peace in a furniture store on June 1st, 1950. That's when you could get married for $2. The license cost us $2, Marty said. And we had to borrow that, chimed in Mickey. They both laughed at the memory. We've had a beautiful marriage, Marty said. Our friends call us the M&M kids. Get it? M for Marty and M for Mickey. The early years were difficult ones for the M&M kids, as they were for most young couples they knew. We brushed our teeth with Lifebuoy soap, Marty said. His wife worked as a store clerk for 35 cents an hour. We paid a babysitter 25 cents an hour, Mickey said, so I was working for 80 cents a day. Their only guilty pleasure was smoking. That, too, was subject to their tight budget. We smoked Wings cigarettes, Marty told me. You could get them for 15 cents a pack. They were really long, so we cut them in half. Instead of having 20 cigarettes, we had 40. Marty worked in newspaper shops in a few small towns over the course of 42 years before he retired. It's my only regret. I should have quit sooner, he said. I love mixing with people, and I get to do that now. He worked in a restaurant for a while, then for 17 months took care of a man who suffered from Parkinson's disease. He worked for another restaurant after that. Then a friend heard that Walmart was looking for greeters at the local store. He encouraged Marty to apply. The woman who hired Marty told me that when she offered him the job, he broke down and cried. I asked Marty about that moment. He said, "Yeah, I remember it. After she told me I was hired, she walked out in the hallway, and I heard her say to someone, 'Boy, I've got a honey in there.'" Here ends Day 2's reading.